This short video is about the two Roman cities, Pompeii and Herculaneum, which were located close to the volcano Mount Vesuvius in Italy. They are referred to as cities frozen in time. There was an earthquake in 62 AD, followed by a massive eruption 17 years later in 79 AD. Pompeii and Herculaneum were preserved but also destroyed differently as a result of this eruption. And then we will look at the excavation by archaeologists to find the secrets of these two cities and giving us valuable information into Roman life. First, we'll look at the locations of the two cities. Pompeii was approximately 8 kilometers from the volcano Mount Vesuvius, with a population of approximately 12,000 inhabitants. Herculaneum was closer at 6 kilometers, but with a smaller population of 5,000. Both had ports on the sea in the Bay of Naples, which you can see on the map. It's referred to here as the Gulf of Naples. And both cities had trading harbours. No one realised at the time of the eruption in Roman times that Vesuvius was an active volcano, since there had been no eruption for over 800 years at this point. The image on the right shows modern Pompeii, and you can see how close it is to the sea. Down the centre of Italy is a mountain range called the Apennines, and you can see that in the left-hand image. On the right is how the Apennines actually look today. This mountain range was formed by two tectonic plates, massive pieces of the Earth's crust, which meet together and smash up against one another, throwing up mountains and also creating volcanoes. Vesuvius is still an active volcano and was created by the pressure of these two plates meeting. Why, if Mount Vesuvius was an active volcano, even though they didn't know it, did the Romans put their cities there? Well, they weren't the first. The Greeks had been there before, so had the Etruscans and also the Samnites. And they'd been there for a reason. The Roman writer Strabo tells us how fertile the whole area was around the volcano, and that is because volcanic soil has lots of nutrients in it and very good for growing things. So they set down vineyards and grew grapes and produced wine and olives too, all important commodities. And of course, Pompeii and Herculaneum were on the Bay of Naples, had harbours and were wonderful trading posts. Lastly, there was a water source, fresh water from the river Sarno close to Pompeii. In the image on the left, which is a fresco, a mural painted onto wet plaster from Pompeii here, you can see the god Dionysius covered in grapes and standing next door to Mount Vesuvius, which is covered in vines and most likely olives. It was, in reality, a great place to live. So in 62 AD, AD of course means Anno Domini, in Latin in the year of the Lord, there was a massive earthquake. This was a warning that Vesuvius was going to erupt, and it did 17 years later. We have knowledge of this from literary sources at the time, but also evidence from the home of Jucundus. You can see Jucundus's bust in the top left-hand corner. He was a rich banker who had a wonderful house. The main room of his house, the atrium, is the next image. You can see the impluvium, the water pool at the bottom. In that room was a lararium, and you can see that on the right hand side. This was a shrine to the Lares, which were the household gods or the spirits. And around the lararium was a relief sculpture, and you can see it at the bottom. It clearly shows here the triumphal arch and the Temple of Jupiter, both in the Forum, which is the civic centre of Pompeii, have been rocked and have moved to the left. The earthquake was a warning that Vesuvius was going to erupt. There was a massive eruption in 79 AD, and most of our information about it comes from the Roman writer Pliny the Younger. His image is top left. He was an eyewitness, as was his uncle Pliny the Elder. Pliny the Elder was a military man and sadly lost his life as he attempted to rescue people from near Herculaneum. The eruption began with a massive column of smoke and material thrown up from Mount Vesuvius. You can see that in the diagram numbered 1. This could have gone up to 30 kilometers into the air. At the top, a cloud of smoke was seen, and Pliny the Younger referred to it as being like the umbrella pine tree, and you can see an image of that in the top right hand corner. Then there were tremors and volcanic stone called pumice, you can see that in the bottom right, and ash began to come down. That's number 3 in the diagram. Fires with the heat started throughout Pompeii, and unfortunately on that day the winds were blowing south, blowing the airborne volcanic material of pumice and ash directly over Pompeii, and the sky over that city became very dark. As a result, buildings began to collapse under the weight of ash and rock falling from the sky on the roofs, and over several hours most of Pompeii was buried. Probably some people had the sense to leave immediately, whereas others thought they could outlive the event, and they perished. As it was, it must have been incredibly slow and also scary. Into the evening of the day of the eruption then, Pompeii had been buried with ash and with pumice stone. And then the next morning, the volcanic column, which had gone so high into the air, collapsed and created pyroclastic flows and surges down the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. In the 2 images here, you can see modern pyroclastic flows and surges. These surges and flows destroyed anything which was not already buried by the ash and pumice which had fallen the previous day. They would have been travelling at 100 miles per hour at a temperature of between 250 and 400 degrees centigrade, and any organic material, any animal or any human in their way would have been instantly destroyed. And so we come to the difference of the destruction and preservation between Pompeii and Herculaneum. Herculaneum was closer to Mount Vesuvius, but also to the west of it, making the fate of its inhabitants different to those of Pompeii. The north wind, blowing southwards on the day, meant that Herculaneum was not really affected by the first phase, as in Pompeii, of falling ash and pumice. Instead, its destruction was almost entirely owing to the later pyroclastic flows of the morning next, which covered the town in volcanic mud between 20 and 25 meters deep. So Pompeii was buried with ash and pumice, and Herculaneum was buried in mud, closer to the volcano, brought down by the surges and flows. Although some skeletons in Herculaneum have been found in the boathouses, presumably they were waiting to escape by sea, those who remained in that city would have been vaporized instantly by the surges, unlike most of the inhabitants of Pompeii, who would have been covered in volcanic material at this point. It is possible that many inhabitants escaped Herculaneum, as they had more time to react without the falling pumice and ash. But it is also possible that they met a more sudden death by pyroclastic surge. The image on the left is of the great archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli, usually just referred to as Fiorelli. He was born in Naples and directed archaeological excavations at Pompeii for 25 years, starting in 1860. He made the first map of the whole site, created a training school, and developed the stratigraphic technique. And you can see an image of that in the middle, whereby layer by layer was peeled off, digging downwards and taking note of what was there, instead of what previous archaeologists had done, which is digging holes in the side of Pompeii to find treasure. He also created his famous plaster cast technique, and you can see one of those plaster casts in the right hand image. Here you see many of the plaster casts which have been unearthed. In the top left hand corner there's a mule, in the bottom left is a dog, and then of course many people have been found. Fiorelli's plaster cast technique was ingenious. In Pompeii, the ash and pumice had covered everything, and that included humans and animals who remained in the city. Over time, this volcanic material hardened, and the encased bodies decayed, usually leaving a skeleton in the cavity. Small holes were then drilled through the rock into the cavity, and then plaster of Paris was pumped in. The plaster then hardened, the rock was peeled away, revealing the cast of a man, a woman, a child, a dog, or a horse.